Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 4 of the 12 Tech Tips of Christmas for 2025. I can't believe we're up to day 4 already. How amazing has this series been? And we've got some wonderful more tips and tricks to come for the rest of this series. Anyway, today, let's dive in to have a look at a really great tool. And it's a tool that I actually experimented with and used this year with one of my own classes. And I was actually really surprised with the engagement and the enjoyment of using this particular tool in the classroom. So let's dive in to day 4 of the 12 Tech Tips of Christmas and check out this wonderful tool that you could be trialing and using in your classroom today. All right, so today we're going to have a look at an amazing tool called Pear Deck. If you have not heard of Pear Deck before, hopefully you will go out and see if it is a tool that you could add to your EdTech toolkit at the end of today's session. So I'm going to start off by just introducing you to Pear Deck, and then we're going to go and explore 5 different ways that you could actually use Pear Deck in the classroom. All right, so Pear Deck is an interactive presentation tool that Pear Deck is an interactive presentation tool that transforms ordinary Google Slides or PowerPoints into engaging student-centered learning experiences. So instead of simply watching a lesson, students join your session on their own device and respond in real time through a variety of different activities, such as draggable activities, drawing tools, polls, text responses, and much, much more. Right? There are so many different tools and a variety of different tools that you can employ in Pear Deck that your students are going to have an absolute blast, and they are going to be so engaged in whatever you're exploring. So Pear Deck is designed to boost participation, check understanding on the spot, and give every learner a voice, whether you're teaching in person, online, or using self-paced lessons. With Pear Deck, your slides don't just present information, they actually invite students into the learning. And as I mentioned, I used Pear Deck this year, and I've used Pear Deck before, but I tried it again in 2025. And what I really loved is that it was really interesting to see my students' understanding and the fact that you get some really great data and analytics and information about your students' participation, which could be really useful if you are looking to conduct some pre-assessments, maybe some ongoing assessment, or maybe even a post assessment to see what your students have taken away. There's so many reasons why Pear Deck is a fantastic tool that you might consider using. And today we are here to explore some of those reasons. So let's dive in because we are going to have a look at some reasons. Now, I've just popped up this screenshot just here. This is what the Pear Deck website looks at the moment. Now, there's a number of different features to Pear Deck, but we're just looking specifically at Pear Deck. So this is not interactive, but if you were to come up here to, for example, the login, if you had a Pear Deck account, you would see a Pear Deck option there, and that is what you would choose to be able to create these presentations and to create a wonderful Pear Deck learning experience. So you might want to go and have a look and see if Pear Deck is a tool that you could add to your EdTech toolkit. It is definitely a tool that's going in my EdTech toolkit, okay, and it's going to stay in my EdTech toolkit because I really found a lot of value in it this year, and I actually think it's something that I'm going to continue to trial and use with as many classes as in as many different ways as I can. All right, so let's dive into day 4 and have a look at today, which is Pear Deck. So we're going to go and share 5 different ways that you could use Pear Deck in the classroom, and we're going to share some examples on how you could do that with some different grades and different subjects and topics and all kinds of things here. So you get a little bit of an idea as to how you could actually use Pear Deck in your own context. Just like if you've been with us here for a while at Evolve EdTech, I always tell you to trial these yourself to see if they fit your context, your purpose, what you are intending to do. Because remember, when we're using EdTech, we should be using it for a purpose. So go out, check it out, trial it for yourself first, see if it works, and then use it with your students. All right, let's dive in and have a look at our first example. All right, number one, real-time formative check-in, a flash. Okay, so we can complete some formative check-ins really quickly, really easily, very, very fast using Pear Deck. So Pear Deck lets you instantly see what every student understands or doesn't understand as you are teaching. With tools like draggable icons, multiple choice questions, short responses, you can adjust your teaching on the spot. Now, this is one thing that I absolutely loved about Pear Deck was that it gives you such valuable information in a wonderful report once the session has been completed that you can go and check and see where your students are doing well, maybe who completely didn't respond to a question or got something wrong, and you can actually make those adjustments and work out what you need to do moving forward. So it does provide real-time formative check-in feedback and assessment that is really valuable. All right, some examples here. Maybe you have a year 3 class. Okay, maybe your students have an activity which requires them to drag place value markers into the right column so that you can immediately see who's confident and who might need support. So we know that that place value is quite tricky. Okay, when you're a young person, okay, place value can get quite overwhelming, especially as we move higher into the different numbers in the world. So being able to assess this using Pear Deck, using EdTech, is a really great way to check your students' confidence, understanding, and see who might need a little bit more support. And remember, you'll have that information in the report at the end as well, which you can use to track your students. Okay, maybe you have a year 7 geography class and you just want to, implement some quick multiple choice check-in questions after you have just finished watching a video looking at different landforms. So great, so amazing. All right, very easy to incorporate this, share that particular Pear Deck on Google Classroom, have that video there, and then have some Pear Deck check-in questions to check their understanding. We're using EdTech, we're moving into the, more into the 21st century. We're looking at some of those other skills that we'll need, especially those EdTech skills. And we're doing that using something like Pear Deck. How simple is that? All right, our next example here is year 10 English, and I am an English teacher, so this I love to see. Maybe you have your students respond to some short response analysis of a quote so that you can quickly gauge essay readiness. So maybe we have a question and you ask your students to write a topic sentence or maybe a short introduction for a text that you might be studying, whether it's Shakespeare or the Hunger Games or whatever you're looking at. You can do this really quickly and simply using Pear Deck. Or maybe you've got some senior students, okay, and you've got some year 12 students. Maybe you've got a biology class, and you might ask your students to label the parts of a cell using the draggable pins to show their understanding. So there's a number of different ways that you can actually use Pear Deck for formative check-in and for formative assessment. All right, it is so versatile. If you can think it, you can probably do it and create it using Pear Deck. It might need a little bit of imagination, a little bit of creativity, but there are so many wonderful things that you can do to gather that information to help you, check your students' understanding and plan for the future using Pear Deck. All right, let's jump over to idea number 2. All right, number 2, interactive brain breaks and warm-ups. Fantastic. Myself, I always start my lessons off with my junior classes with what's called a do now. And this is something that my wonderful friend Bindi introduced when she was my head teacher at one of my schools. And Bindi is still wonderful and part of my life, and I love her to death. And I love having this do now, this lesson starter activity, this warm up to get our students ready so that we have a really great lesson. And this is one way that we could do it using EdTech and Pear Deck. So maybe you start your lessons with a spark. Okay, Pear Deck warm ups get students thinking straight away and help you gauge their starting point. All right, and there's so many different ways that we could do this in the classroom. Okay, let's go through some examples. Number one, asking our students to draw what they remember from yesterday's lesson. So if you have some younger kids in the younger years, that might be something that you use rather than a text-based question. So get them to draw something, get them to draw a representation of a truck or the weather. Okay, whatever you're studying, you might be able to do that with them to see what they remember and what they took away from the previous lesson. All right, our next example here is maybe you have a stage 4 science class. So where I teach, we use stage-based year groups. So in our particular context, stage 4 is actually years 7 and 8. All right. So maybe you've got a year 7 or year 8 class, and maybe you use Pear Deck to get them to predict what might happen in today's experiment before you actually give them any explanation or context. So we're actually using those predicting skills to come up with, a hypothesis before we've gotten started. And then you'll have all of these collaborated and, put together, which is great. And you can go back and refer to them at the end and see who was close or who was right off the mark. And, there could be so many wonderful discussions that you could have from this particular example. All right, maybe you've got a year 11 PDHPE class. So we've got some kind of physical ed, class. Maybe we use Pear Deck and we start off by using Pear Deck as, for some kind of draggable activity where we're checking with students using emojis, or maybe we're checking their confidence or understanding when it comes to a particular part of the syllabus that you might be teaching them. All right, so there's lots of ways that you can use Pear Deck. Can you see already that if you just put your mind to it, you can come up with something that will be absolutely amazing, so engaging, boost that motivation, and absolutely blow you away with just how amazing you are when it comes to implementing some ed tech. All right, our last example here is maybe you've got a year 5 history, or you've got some kind of humanities subject in your class. Maybe you ask your students to sketch a symbol that represents an early explorer or historical figure. Okay, maybe a compass, maybe an atlas, maybe some kind of globe, a map. It might be some kind of, knick-knack. Who knows what it is? It could be anything related to an explorer or historical figure that you might be studying. And then you can have a look at these and see what kinds of, concepts or symbols or ideas your class have engaged with and taken away from your studies. So 4 really simple, really great ways that you can use Pear Deck for brain breaks, warm-ups, so many ways that you can use Pear Deck in the classroom to engage your students. All right, let's move on to idea number 3. Number 3, make existing slide decks interactive. I love this idea. Did you know that with Pear Deck, there is an absolutely lovely, and this is what I have used, Chrome extension, which is great because this means that you can now use those lessons that you have already created, especially with Google Slides, and you can start to add some of that Pear Deck interactivity and those activities into your presentations. No need to rebuild, okay? We don't have to go out there and reinvent everything. We can actually go in and use what we already have and add some interactivity, add some engaging elements and activities. And, we can actually do that, which is going to save us a truckload of time. Okay, here's some examples. Maybe you have a year 6 class, you're doing your English unit. I might go back to when I was in year 6, and that was in the 90s, the late 90s. And I remember we did a space unit, which is probably something that's fairly consistent across all of the world. We did a space unit and everything was about space. And I remember writing a story and all kinds of things. So maybe you could turn a static comprehension question into a written response that students complete live. Okay, so maybe we actually take something that is just static and actually have some of those comprehension questions, and we can actually see the students' responses. We can share those students' responses on the screen in front of the class so that everybody can have a look. We're not pinpointing anybody. We're not, making anybody stress that you're going to be selected to share their particular answer, because we've got them all written there and we can share those as a class. have a little bit of fun, laugh at some spelling mistakes, and, enjoy the collaborative nature of this particular activity and learn together. Okay, that's probably the most important thing. All right, we might have a little laugh, we might have a little giggle, but we're also learning together and seeing what our peers know. And it's a really great way for you to see what your students already know as well. All right, maybe you've got year 9 mathematics, okay, and maybe your students are there, they're annotating diagrams or graphs, and they're doing that in the slides, okay. If you have the capacity to be able to have technology where your students are using styluses or some kind of element to be able to, work with a device, how cool would that be? And you can do that in a slide deck using Pear Deck. Or maybe you've got a year 12 modern history class. Okay, we've gone back to the seniors. Here we could get our students to highlight primary source excerpts to identify bias or perspective. All right, so again, using that technology, doing things that we're already doing, but actually now starting to incorporate some of those different Pear Deck elements and activities, finding what works, of course, into our lessons and using lessons and using presentations and Google Slides decks that we already have so that we're not reinventing the wheel and we're not rebuilding something that we already have. So using those existing slide decks to create them and make them a little bit more interactive is our third way that you could use Pear Deck in the classroom. All right, let's head over to idea number 4. All right, idea number 4, quick exit tickets. How cool and simple is this? So maybe you finish off your lesson with some kind of exit ticket, an intentional reflection. Okay, exit tickets are fantastic and they can be literally anything that you can think of. All right, so here's some examples of how we could use Pear Deck for an exit ticket. All right, maybe we have some kind of statement that we get our students to respond to. For example, one thing I learned, one thing I'm still unsure about, and then they write down what they have learned in the lesson and something that they still might feel that they need to work on. That is suitable for every single student. You might rephrase that. You might reduce the amount of requirements of things that students need to reflect on there, especially if you've got younger students. It might not necessarily be text-based. Okay, you might just have some emojis to gauge an understanding of how your students felt throughout that lesson. But a really quick exit ticket that you could use just there. Maybe you've got some kind of STEM class here in the upper primary system. All right, and here maybe you have your students drag their confidence level onto a scale of 1 to 5. So how do they feel when it comes to STEM? Okay, how do they feel to, when it comes to all of those different elements? And again, you can gauge their understanding and you have that information that you can then use to help you devise and create really engaging and rewarding and fulfilling lessons moving forward. Or maybe you've got a year 11 chemistry class. So maybe you ask for a short explanation of one misconception students corrected during the lesson. So maybe that there's some kind of misconception, okay, and you ask for a short explanation to, again, test your students' understanding, see how they're going, see if they're able to identify and explain and elaborate, and, use all of these skills that you have been teaching them. So exit tickets, another really simple way that we could use Pear Deck in the classroom. All right, let's head over to our final example of how we could use Pear Deck in the classroom. Number 5, we can capture prior knowledge before starting a unit. So we've kind of elaborated to this earlier on, and I really think this is a great way to use Pear Deck. All right, if you want to gather information and have some really good information that you can refer to, Pear Deck is a tool that you can use. So getting a clear understanding of what your students already know and what your students don't know is so vital in helping us as educators. And we can do that with Pear Deck. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. Okay, maybe you've got a year 3 science class. So maybe you ask your students just to draw what they think plants need to survive. Okay, so you are using a little bit of creativity there. You're getting a bit of a guide as to what your students already know so that you can plan accordingly and make sure that your students provided with the information so that they can develop their skills, knowledge, and understanding so that you can actually, rectify any of those misconceptions nice and early. All right, maybe you've got a year 7 history class. Maybe you have a prompt where your students respond to the concept of what is archaeology? Okay, what does this term mean? All right, and you can collect some information. It might be a written statement, a written response, so that you can actually see what your students think archaeology is, okay, before you actually dive into exploring it in more depth. Okay, maybe you have a year 10 English class. You ask your students to share their initial thoughts on a theme before reading a novel or viewing a film. All right, I'll give you a perfect example here, and I do love to segue into my own world so that I can show you that I am a teacher as well. I remember earlier this year, we look at Macbeth with my year 10s, or we looked at Macbeth with my year 10 class. I love Macbeth. I'm an English teacher. I love Shakespeare. Okay, and I remember starting off with some questions exploring all different kinds of concepts that related to Macbeth, the themes, the characters, the plot, to see what my students' perspective was before we started reading. So I actually got their initial thoughts before we actually dove in and started reading it. And it was really interesting because obviously I had an understanding of Shakespeare. So I was there going, this is really interesting, hearing their responses and thoughts and things like that, knowing what we were about to explore. So a really cool way to capture some of those initial thoughts and see how they might guide your exploration of a text or a topic. Or maybe you've got your senior students again, you've got year 11 economics, and maybe you ask your students to predict how a change in price affects demand before formal instruction. So, again, just gathering a little bit of prior knowledge and understanding and that evidence so that we can use that to help us plan accordingly so that we're not there teaching our students something that they already have a really good understanding of and they might have mastered. So using Pear Deck to capture prior knowledge before starting a unit is a really great way to use this amazing versatile tool. All right, so there we have it. 5 ways, 5 very simple ways that you could start using Pear Deck today. All right. Now, again, I highly encourage you just to jump over and see if Pear Deck is a tool that would be right for you. Make sure it's right for you before you actually jump in there because it might require a bit of an investment. Okay, so that is why I always encourage you to trial them first. But see what you can do with Pear Deck. How can you boost engagement? How can you create more interactivity with those presentations that you already have and use? How can you use this tool in your classroom with your students? Go out there, give it a go, see what you can do, and have some fun with technology in the classroom. Well, that brings us to the end of day 4 of the 12 tech tips of Christmas for 2025. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have taken away something from the series so far. There is still lots more to come. All right. So make sure that you are heading back to our YouTube channel, checking out our social channels, and checking out our videos each day right up until the 24th of December. All right, before we head off, don't forget, if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the Evolve EdTech YouTube channel. We would love to boost our subscriber numbers, so make sure that you've done that. Make sure you've given this video a thumbs up. You do not know how much that actually helps increase our reach so that other educators can start to find our videos and become part of the Evolve EdTech community. All right, we will be back tomorrow for day 5 of the 12 tech tips of Christmas. We've got more wonderful tips, tricks, and tools to share with you for the rest of this series. But until then, everybody, stay safe, and we will see you again next time for the 12 tech tips of Christmas.